The slap echoed through Rosie's diner like a gunshot. Reese crumpled against the booth, ice water dripping down her face, mascara bleeding into her trembling lips. 4 women in designer heels circled her like wolves, Brianna yanking a fistful of her hair. "Thought you could hide from us, homewrecker?" The whole restaurant froze, forks suspended midair. No one moved, no one breathed, except Cole Hayden, the quiet man in the corner booth, the one with little Josie clutching his scarred hand. He leaned down, whispered something to his daughter, then stood. Just a carpenter. Just a single dad. Just another Thursday night. "Wrong table, wrong day, ladies." His voice was calm. Too calm. They laughed, called their husbands. 3 large men burst through the door, ready to teach this hero a lesson. They had no idea who Cole Hayden really was, and neither did anyone else in that diner until tonight. The smell of bacon grease and fresh coffee hung thick in the air at Rosie's diner, mixing with the gentle twang of country music drifting from the old jukebox in the corner. Cole Hayden pushed open the glass door, the little bell above it chiming softly as he stepped inside with his daughter's hand, wrapped firmly in his own. 7-year-old Josie bounced on her heels, her pigtails swinging as she tugged him toward their usual booth by the window. This was their ritual, their sacred Thursday night tradition that had held steady for 3 years now, ever since they moved to this small Tennessee town where nobody knew his name or his past. Cole slid into the worn leather seat, positioning himself where he could see the entire restaurant without turning his head. It was a habit he could not shake, no matter how many years passed since he traded his uniform for sawdust and wood shavings. His eyes swept the room automatically, cataloging every face, every exit, every potential threat, before settling on his daughter's bright smile across the table. Josie was already reaching for the laminated menu, even though they both knew she would order the same thing she always did. Chicken fingers with extra honey mustard and a chocolate milkshake so thick you could stand a spoon in it. The diner hummed with the comfortable noise of families finishing their meals, couples sharing slices of pie, and the occasional burst of laughter from the counter where old-timers swapped stories over endless cups of coffee. Cole felt his shoulders relax by a fraction as Rosie herself waddled over with her notepad, her gray hair pinned up in its perpetual bun, her smile warm enough to melt butter. She knew them by name now, knew their order by heart, and Cole appreciated that she never asked questions about the scars that ran along his forearms or why a man his age seemed to startle at sudden noises. Josie pointed at the faded scar near his wrist as Rosie walked away with their order. Her small finger traced the raised skin, her eyes curious, but not afraid. She had asked about his scars before, many times, and each time Cole deflected with the same tired excuse. He told her they were from work accidents, from a saw that slipped or a nail that caught him wrong. She accepted this because she trusted him completely, because at 7 years old, fathers did not lie, and the world was still a place where simple answers could satisfy complicated questions. He was about to change the subject when he noticed the woman at the next table. She sat alone, her shoulders hunched forward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, invisible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her hands trembling as she lifted a glass of water to her lips. Something about her posture made Cole's instincts flare, that old familiar tightness in his gut that had saved his life more times than he could count. She looked hunted, he realized. She had the look of prey that knew the predator was close. He learned later that her name was Reese, that she was 28 years old and worked as a hospice nurse at the care facility on the edge of town. But in that moment, she was just a stranger, with fear written across every line of her face. Cole watched her from the corner of his eye, noting how she kept glancing toward the door, how her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm against the tabletop. Josie noticed too, her childish observation skills sharper than most adults gave her credit for. She leaned across the table and whispered that the lady looked sad, and Cole nodded, hoping whatever storm was brewing would pass them by. The front door of the diner slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows in their frames. 4 women swept in like a cold front, their designer heels clicking against the checkered linoleum floor with the precision of a firing squad. The leader was a blonde in her early 40s, her face twisted into something ugly, despite what must have cost a fortune in cosmetic procedures. Her eyes scanned the restaurant with predatory focus until they landed on Reese, and then her painted lips curled into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. Cole recognized the formation immediately. It was the same way a wolf pack surrounded wounded prey, cutting off escape routes, boxing in the target. The blonde, who he would later learn was named Brianna, stalked toward Reese's table with her entourage fanning out behind her. The other diners fell silent one by one, conversations dying mid-sentence as the tension in the room spiked to an almost unbearable level. Even the jukebox seemed to quiet down, as if the music itself knew something terrible was about to happen. Brianna stopped directly in front of Reese's booth. Her manicured hands planted on her hips, her voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent diner. She called Reese a homewrecker, a gold digger, a pathetic little tramp who thought she could steal what did not belong to her. Reese tried to speak, her words coming out in broken fragments, about being just a nurse, about a patient who was only that. But Brianna was not interested in explanations. She reached down and grabbed a fistful of Reese's hair, yanking her head back with a violence that made several gasps ripple through the watching crowd. The slap came next, the sound of it cracking through the air like a whip. Reese's head snapped to the side, and then came the water, the entire contents of a glass dumped over her head, ice cubes tumbling down her blouse, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. Brianna's friends laughed, their voices sharp and cruel, and one of them pulled out a phone to record the humiliation. Cole watched it all unfold with a growing heat building in his chest, his hands tightening into fists beneath the table where no one could see. Josie pressed herself against his side, her small body trembling, her eyes wide with a fear she did not fully understand. She asked him in a whisper why those women were being so mean, why nobody was helping the crying lady. And Cole had no answer that would make sense to a 7-year-old. He looked around the restaurant at all the faces turned away, at the men who studied their plates, and the women who whispered behind their hands, at a room full of people who had collectively decided that this was not their problem. Brianna pulled Reese out of the booth by her hair, demanding to know where she thought she could run, where she thought she could hide from the consequences of her actions. Reese was sobbing now, her protests lost in the chaos, her body limp with the acceptance of someone who had endured this before. Cole felt something shift inside him, some switch that he had kept firmly in the off position for nearly 5 years now. He looked down at his daughter, at her trembling lip and the tears gathering in her eyes, and he made a decision. He leaned down and pressed his lips to Josie's forehead, his voice calm and steady despite the storm building in his veins. He told her to stay right here, to not move from this spot no matter what happened. He told her that Daddy needed to help someone, and that everything would be okay. Then he stood, his full 6 feet 2 inches unfolding from the booth. And he walked toward the cluster of women with the kind of deliberate calm that should have warned them something was very wrong. Cole stepped between Brianna and Reese, his broad shoulders forming a wall that broke their little circle of cruelty. His voice came out low and even, carrying just enough edge to cut through the noise. Wrong table. Wrong day, ladies. The words hung in the air between them, simple and declarative, a warning that any sensible person would have heeded. But Brianna was not sensible, and she was certainly not accustomed to being challenged, least of all by some nobody in flannel and work boots who smelled like sawdust. She laughed, and her friends laughed with her, their voices tinkling like broken glass. She asked him who he thought he was, some kind of white knight riding in to save a worthless little whore. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing at his chest, her eyes blazing with the confidence of a woman who had never been told no. Her perfume was overwhelming, expensive, but applied with a heavy hand, and Cole did not flinch as she got close enough for him to count the veneers on her teeth. Cole told her simply that Reese was not what they thought, that they had made a mistake, and that they should leave before things got complicated. His voice remained steady, his body relaxed, but ready, his eyes holding that particular flatness that combat veterans learn to recognize in each other. Brianna did not recognize it, could not possibly understand what it meant, because she had never met anyone like Cole Hayden in her carefully curated life of country clubs and charity galas. She pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice dripping with theatrical fury as she demanded that Derek get down here right now, that some pathetic handyman was trying to be a hero, that he needed to come teach this idiot a lesson. She hung up with a satisfied smile, telling Cole that he had no idea what was coming, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his miserable little life. Cole said nothing. He simply positioned himself between the women and Reese, his feet planted shoulder-width apart, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The wait was not long. Maybe 15 minutes passed before the diner door burst open again, this time admitting 3 men who looked like they had never been told no either. Derek was in the lead, Brianna's husband, a former college linebacker gone to seed, but still carrying enough bulk to intimidate most people. Behind him came 2 more, younger and fitter, the kind of men who spent their gym time on bicep curls and mirror selfies rather than anything practical. Derek crossed the diner in a few long strides, his face flushed with anger, his voice booming as he demanded to know what the hell was going on here. Brianna rushed to his side, playing the wounded victim now, pointing at Cole with a trembling finger, claiming that this crazy man had attacked her, had threatened her, had defended that little tramp who was trying to steal her inheritance. Derek's eyes narrowed, his hands curling into fists, his alpha male posturing ramping up to maximum as he stepped into Cole's space. He shoved Cole hard in the chest, expecting him to stumble, expecting the fear and retreat that his size usually guaranteed. Cole did not move. His feet stayed planted, his center of gravity dropping almost imperceptibly, his body absorbing the push like a boulder absorbing a wave. Something flickered in Derek's eyes then, the first tiny spark of doubt, but his ego would not let him acknowledge it. He drew back his fist and threw a haymaker aimed at Cole's jaw, putting all his former linebacker power behind it. Cole moved like water, his head slipped to the side by bare inches, Derek's fist whistling past his ear, and then his hands were moving in a blur of controlled violence. He caught Derek's extended arm, twisted, and applied pressure to the joint in a way that dropped the larger man to his knees in less than 3 seconds. The crack of the hold locking into place was loud enough to make the nearest diners flinch. Cole's voice remained absolutely calm as he told Derek to stay down, that this did not need to go any further. The other 2 men rushed him simultaneously, coordination born of gym bro confidence rather than any actual training. Cole released Derek and flowed into the attack, his movements efficient and brutal in their economy. He caught the first one's wrist, redirected his momentum, and sent him crashing into a table that collapsed under the impact. The second one managed a wild swing that Cole ducked, answering with a palm strike to the solar plexus that folded the man in half and left him gasping for air on the checkered floor. The entire confrontation lasted perhaps 10 seconds. 10 seconds from standing alone against 3 larger men to standing alone among 3 disabled opponents. The diner had gone absolutely silent. The kind of silence that happens when people witness something their minds cannot immediately process. Cole stood in the middle of it all, his breathing slightly elevated, but otherwise showing no signs of exertion, his eyes sweeping the room with that automatic threat assessment before settling on Josie. A memory flashed through his mind, unbidden, sharp, and painful. A dusty street in a country whose name he was not allowed to speak. The weight of his rifle in his hands, the sound of gunfire echoing off mud brick walls, his team moving through hostile territory, protecting a convoy of civilians who would never know their names. The moment when everything went wrong, when the ambush came from 3 directions at once, when he watched his best friend take a bullet meant for someone else. That was the mission that broke him. The one that made him look at his newborn daughter and swear that he would never raise a weapon again. But some skills could not be unlearned. Some training went deeper than memory, deeper than conscious thought, down into the very fiber of muscle and bone. Cole had not fought in nearly 5 years, had not even thrown a punch since the day he hung up his trident and walked away from everything he had known. Yet his body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. It remembered how to protect, how to neutralize, how to end a threat with maximum efficiency and minimum damage. And tonight, for better or worse, it had remembered without asking his permission. His daughter was staring at him with an expression he had never seen before. It was not quite fear, not quite awe, but something complicated in between. She had just watched her quiet carpenter father transform into something else entirely, something with hard edges and dangerous capabilities that did not match the man who braided her hair and burned pancakes on Sunday mornings. Cole felt his heart crack a little at that look, at the knowledge that he had just shown her a part of himself he had sworn to keep buried forever. Brianna had backed against the counter, her face pale, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. Her voice came out high and thin as she demanded to know who he was, what he was, how a simple handyman had just dismantled her husband and his friends like they were made of paper. The question hung in the air, and Cole had no intention of answering it. He turned his back on her, moving toward Reese, offering his hand to help the still trembling woman to her feet. The distant wail of sirens cut through the diner's silence, growing louder with each passing second. Someone had called 911, probably during the initial confrontation, and now red and blue lights were painting the windows in alternating strokes of color. Cole helped Reese to a chair, his touch gentle despite the violence that had just flowed through those same hands, and he returned to his daughter's side, just as the front door opened to admit a uniformed figure. Sheriff Hank Dawson stepped into the diner, his hand resting on his service weapon, his eyes taking in the scene with the practiced assessment of a 20-year law enforcement veteran. He saw the 3 men groaning on the floor, the cluster of frightened women against the counter, the scattered chairs and broken table, and the quiet man standing protectively near a child and a crying woman. Then his gaze locked on Cole's face, and his entire body went rigid with recognition. The name escaped him before he could stop it. Cole Hayden. The words came out somewhere between a question and a statement, colored with the disbelief of a man seeing a ghost from another lifetime. Cole met his eyes and said nothing, but the acknowledgement was written in the slight nod of his head, the resigned set of his shoulders. The 2 men knew each other, and that knowledge rippled through the watching crowd like electricity through water. Hank moved closer, his voice dropping low as he asked what the hell Cole was doing here, what had happened, whether this was going to cause problems he was not prepared to handle. But before Cole could respond, Brianna found her voice again, shrieking accusations about assault, about a dangerous madman who had attacked her husband without provocation. She demanded that Hank arrest him immediately, threatened to have his badge if he did not do his job. The sheriff turned to face her, and something in his expression made her words die in her throat. He told her to be quiet, that she had no idea who she was talking about, that the man she had just called a simple handyman had more combat decorations than her husband had golf trophies. The silence that followed was absolute, as Hank turned back to the watching crowd, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. He introduced Cole properly then, his tone carrying equal parts respect and wonder. Master Chief Cole Hayden, United States Navy SEAL, 15 years of service in theaters most Americans could not find on a map. 2 silver stars, 3 bronze stars, a Purple Heart, and a list of classified operations that would never see the light of day. The man was a genuine war hero, Hank explained. Someone who had spent his adult life protecting people who would never know his name. And these idiots had just tried to beat him up in a family restaurant. The revelation hit the diner like a shockwave. People's mouths fell open, their eyes widening as they looked at Cole with entirely new understanding. The quiet carpenter who fixed their fences and built their bookshelves, the single dad who brought his little girl to the diner every Thursday night, was suddenly someone else entirely. Brianna had gone white as chalk, her earlier confidence completely shattered, while her husband struggled to his feet with the help of his equally battered friends. Hank turned his attention to Reese then, his voice gentling as he asked her to tell him what had really happened. And so the truth came out, piece by piece, the story that Brianna had tried so hard to bury beneath violence and intimidation. Reese was a hospice nurse, one of the best at Sunset Ridge Care Center. For the past 8 months, she had been the primary caregiver for a 78-year-old man dying of pancreatic cancer, a man named Harold Patterson, a man who happened to be Brianna's father. The revelation drew gasps from several corners of the room. Hank continued, his voice hardening as the picture became clearer. Harold Patterson had been essentially abandoned by his family during his final months. Brianna had not visited once. Too busy with her social calendar and her shopping trips and her perfect life to sit with a dying old man. But Reese had been there every day, holding his hand through the pain, reading to him when he could not sleep, becoming the daughter he never really had. Harold had changed his will, leaving a portion of his estate to the young nurse who had shown him more kindness in 8 months than his own daughter had shown in 40 years. Brianna had found out through the family lawyer and had spent the past 2 weeks hunting Reese down, convinced that she had somehow manipulated a dying man into giving away what was rightfully hers. She had been wrong, spectacularly and completely wrong, but her pride and her greed had blinded her to anything resembling the truth. Hank pulled out his phone and showed Brianna something that made her face crumple. Text messages from her own father, saved and forwarded by someone at the care facility. Messages that called Reese his angel, that thanked her for making his final days bearable, that expressed sorrow that his own blood had abandoned him when he needed them most. Messages that made it absolutely clear that Harold Patterson had known exactly what he was doing when he rewrote his will. Cole watched Brianna's facade crack and crumble, watched the moment when she finally understood what she had done, what she had become. Her knees seemed to weaken, and she sank into the nearest chair, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. Her friends had already begun to edge toward the door, their loyalty evaporating now that there was no victory to be won. Her husband stood with his arm cradled against his chest, his earlier aggression replaced by the bewildered expression of a man who had just learned he was married to a monster. Josie had not moved from the booth, her eyes still fixed on her father with that complicated expression. Cole walked back to her, his steps slow and heavy now that the adrenaline was fading, and he knelt down beside her seat. He expected questions he was not sure how to answer, accusations he probably deserved. But instead, his daughter simply reached out and wrapped her small arms around his neck. She held him tight, her face pressed against his shoulder, and he felt something inside him crack and heal in the same moment. The deputies led Derek and his friends outside for formal statements, their injuries documented with clinical efficiency. Brianna remained slumped in her chair, her makeup ruined by tears that seemed genuine for the first time that evening. Hank took statements from the witnesses, all of whom told essentially the same story of unprovoked aggression met with measured response. Cole answered questions quietly, his voice flat and factual, his eyes constantly drifting back to where Josie sat with a chocolate milkshake that Rosie had quietly delivered. Reese approached him when the official business was concluded, her steps tentative, her eyes still swollen, but now holding something like wonder. She told him she did not know how to thank him, that he had stepped in when no one else would, that he had protected a complete stranger, at risk to himself and his daughter. Her voice broke on the last words, the weight of weeks of fear and harassment finally releasing in a flood of emotion. Cole told her simply that she was not wrong, that she had done nothing to deserve what happened to her, and that she should never let anyone make her feel otherwise. His words were plain and unadorned, but they carried a weight that made Reese straighten slightly, made her chin lift a fraction higher. He asked if she had someone to call, someone to stay with tonight, and when she nodded, he left it at that. Not everyone needed saving twice in one evening. Hank pulled Cole aside as the diner slowly returned to normal. The scattered furniture righted, the floor swept clean of broken glass. The sheriff's voice was low and careful as he asked if Cole was really okay, if he needed anything, if the exposure was going to cause problems. They both knew what he meant. Cole had spent the last 5 years building a quiet life, burying the man he used to be beneath sawdust and small-town anonymity. Tonight had blown that cover completely. Cole looked across the diner to where Josie was showing Rosie something on her napkin, probably a drawing, her earlier fear apparently forgotten in the resilience that children possess. He told Hank that he was tired of hiding, that he had spent so long trying to protect his daughter from who he was that he had forgotten to show her who he could be. The words surprised him as much as they did Hank, but they felt true in a way that settled something long unsettled in his chest. The drive home was quiet, Josie drowsy in her booster seat, the street lights painting moving shadows across her sleeping face. Cole gripped the steering wheel and tried to organize his thoughts, tried to prepare for the conversation he knew was coming. His daughter had seen him hurt people tonight, had witnessed violence that no 7-year-old should have to process. He had no idea how to explain it to her, how to make her understand, without frightening her. She surprised him at bedtime, her small voice cutting through the routine of brushing teeth and reading stories. She asked about his scars, the same question she had asked 100 times before, but this time there was something different in her tone. She was not asking about work accidents anymore. She was asking about the truth. Cole sat on the edge of her bed, his hands clasped between his knees, and for the first time in her life, he did not lie to his daughter. He told her that he used to be a soldier, that his job was to protect people from bad things, and that sometimes protecting people meant getting hurt. He told her that he left that life when she was born, that he wanted to be a different kind of man for her, someone who built things instead of breaking them. He told her that he was sorry she had seen what happened at the diner, that he had hoped to keep that part of himself hidden forever. Josie listened with the grave attention that children give to important matters, her small face serious in the glow of her nightlight. When he finished, she asked him a question that nearly stopped his heart. She asked if he was scared that she would be afraid of him now. Cole felt tears burning at the back of his eyes, tears he had not shed in longer than he could remember. He admitted that yes, that was exactly what he was scared of. His daughter reached up and put her small hands on either side of his face, making him look directly into her eyes. She told him that she was not scared of him, that he was her daddy, and that daddies were supposed to protect people. She told him that the crying lady needed help, and he helped her, and that made him a hero, not a monster. Then she pulled him down and kissed his forehead, the same way he kissed hers every night, and told him to stop being silly. Cole held his daughter close, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with the release of tension he had carried for years. She was so small, so wise, so utterly unbroken by what she had witnessed. He had spent half a decade trying to hide himself from her, and in the end, she had seen him clearly and loved him anyway. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for, more than he probably deserved. That night, after Josie finally fell asleep, Cole sat alone on the back porch of their small house, a beer growing warm in his hand, his eyes fixed on the stars that scattered across the Tennessee sky. He thought about his wife, about how she would have handled tonight, about what she would have said. She had been the one who convinced him to leave the teams, who showed him that strength did not always mean fighting, that sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was walk away from war and toward peace. She would have been proud of him, he decided, not for the fighting, although she had never been naive about what his job required, but for the choice, for choosing to protect someone who could not protect herself, even when it cost him the anonymity he had worked so hard to build. His wife had always believed that a man's true character was revealed not by what he did when it was easy, but by what he did when it was hard. Tonight had been hard in ways he was still processing. The scars on his arms seemed to ache in the cool night air, phantom pains from wounds that had long since healed on the surface. Each one told a story he had never shared with anyone except his wife. The long one near his wrist was from a knife fight in a shipping container, fighting for his life against men who had no intention of letting him leave alive. The cluster of small circles on his forearm were shrapnel souvenirs from an IED that had killed 2 men standing closer to the blast. The thick ridge across his bicep was a bullet graze, a reminder of how close he had come to leaving Josie an orphan before she was even born. He had hidden these stories from his daughter because he wanted to protect her innocence, wanted to let her believe that the world was a safe place where fathers fixed broken shelves and taught their children to ride bikes. But innocence and ignorance were not the same thing, he realized now. Josie did not need to be shielded from the truth. She needed to understand that sometimes good people had to do hard things, that protecting others was worth the cost, that her father was not perfect, but he was trying. The following Thursday found Cole and Josie back at Rosie's diner. Same booth, same time, same order. The diner looked exactly as it always had, checkered floors and red vinyl seats, and the smell of coffee and bacon thick in the air. But something had changed in the way people looked at Cole now. There were nods of acknowledgement, small waves from across the room, the particular respect that small towns reserve for those who have proven themselves worthy. Rosie brought their food personally, her smile warmer than usual, her hand squeezing Cole's shoulder in a gesture that said more than words could manage. She told him that what he did last week mattered, that Reese had come by to thank her for not kicking them all out, that the whole town was talking about the quiet carpenter who turned out to be something else entirely. Cole accepted the words with a nod, uncomfortable with the attention, but no longer ashamed of the reason for it. The bell above the door chimed, and Cole looked up to see Reese entering the diner. She was not alone. Beside her, moving slowly with the help of a wheelchair, was an elderly man with paper-thin skin and gentle eyes. Cole recognized him from the description Hank had given, from the story that had unfolded in this very spot. Harold Patterson had not died yet. Against all expectations, he was still fighting. They made their way to Cole's table, Reese's face carrying a nervous smile, Harold's gaze fixed on the man who had defended his favorite nurse. The old man's voice was barely above a whisper, weakened by the disease that was slowly claiming him, but his words were clear enough. He thanked Cole for protecting the only person who had treated him like a human being in his final months. He thanked him for standing up when everyone else stayed seated. Cole told him that Reese had earned that protection, that anyone who gave comfort to the dying deserved to be comforted in return. The words were simple, but Harold's eyes filmed with tears. His trembling hand reaching out to grasp Cole's in a grip that was surprisingly firm. There was understanding in that touch, the recognition of one man who had faced mortality to another. Harold might not have been a soldier, but he was fighting his own war, and he knew a fellow warrior when he saw one. Harold shared something else before Reese wheeled him away. He said that Brianna had come to see him for the first time in over a year. She had cried, really cried, and begged for his forgiveness. He was not sure if she deserved it yet, but he was willing to try. Sometimes it took a crisis to wake people up, he said, and sometimes the crisis came in the form of a stranger who refused to look away. Cole watched them go, his coffee growing cold in his hands, his thoughts circling around the strange paths that life could take. He had come to this diner last week expecting nothing more than burgers and milkshakes and quiet time with his daughter. Instead, he had been forced to confront the man he used to be, and in doing so, had discovered that maybe that man wasn't someone he needed to hide from after all. Josie tugged at his sleeve, pulling his attention back to the present. She wanted to know if they could come back next Thursday too, if this could still be their special night, if everything could go back to normal. Cole smiled at her, really smiled, and told her that yes, they would be back, and yes, this would always be their special night. But maybe normal was not the right word anymore. Maybe normal had never really fit them in the first place. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, father and daughter, the evening light slanting through the windows and painting everything in shades of gold. Cole thought about all the years he had spent running from himself, all the energy he had poured into being invisible, all the fear he had carried about what would happen if his daughter ever saw the truth, and he realized that the truth had set him free in a way he never expected. Josie asked him, as they were getting ready to leave, whether he would do it again if he had to. If some other crying lady needed help, would he stand up? Would he risk everything to protect a stranger? Cole looked at his daughter, at the fierce certainty in her young eyes, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. Wrong table, wrong day, baby girl. Always. The words came out steady and sure, a promise and a philosophy wrapped into one simple phrase. Josie grinned, her gap-toothed smile lighting up her whole face, and she grabbed his hand to pull him toward the door. They walked out of Rosie's diner together, into the cooling evening air, into a future that Cole no longer needed to hide from. He had spent 5 years being invisible. Now, finally, he was ready to be seen.